start. There we go. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, day 46. This is, of course, the show where we code a complete game from scratch, live on the internets, using nothing but our own little typing fingers, no engines, no libraries. Basically, as an educational project and as sort of just a fun project, because there's something pretty fun about kind of learning how absolutely everything works and being able to have control over everything, through the entire pipeline. It's very satisfying and kind of one of those things I think everyone should do at least once. And so anyway, without further ado, we have we kind of left off on Friday implementing some collision detection stuff, and I want to get back to that. But before I do, I should point out that if you pre-ordered the source code on handmadehero.org, I'm sorry, if you pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you have full access to the source code, so you should have gotten a link in your email. In that link, there will be a zip file, and that zip file has zips for every day. So we're on day 46, so you want to unzip day 45 source code from inside that zip file so that you can be exactly where we are as we start coding right now, because that'll put you exactly where I am if you want to follow along at home, which I highly recommend you do, because that's the best way to learn, is kind of being able to follow along and play around with things yourself, and keep on going after the show ends to kind of see if you can play around with stuff and make sure you really understand everything that we did. So that said, let's take a look at where we were. So if you remember correctly, we were at the point where we were trying to fix basically our sticking problem, which is that right there, because we didn't really have a really good collision loop, and we needed to start working on that, because we started to do our character motion and it was getting a little bit of a better feel to it, but we needed to start working on that collision problem. So before we do that, we have to address something which is actually pretty hilarious, that nobody noticed except for one person on the forums. And I didn't even notice it because I actually thought, it was something that we were going to get to eventually, but I didn't think we needed to quite get to it yet because I actually thought something was happening that was not happening. So this will be pretty interesting, and I'll show you, I'll give you the full walk down here. So if you remember correctly, we basically have our little, our code here that processes controller input, and basically it does, controller is analog, it would do some stuff, and if it's not, then it uses digital movement, right? And I was under the impression that, oh yeah, right, we're only going to call this once, we're only going to do this branch once, because as we loop over all the controllers, there's only one digital controller at the moment, right? There's only one digital controller, which is the keyboard, right? So I don't have to worry about the fact that this would happen multiple times if you had multiple digital controllers in there, blah, blah, blah. But what actually happens, at least, or so saith the forums, and I believe them because I hadn't looked at it yet. Where is my, let's see here. Let's go to handmade.cpp. There we go. So I believe what actually happens is that's not how they're actually set at the moment. So when we come in here, right, I'm going to set a breakpoint and take a look at what happens in this loop. If we look at controller index, I'll go ahead and add controller index to the watch window here, controller index. Let's take a look at what happens. So we're on controller index 0. We're going to go through here and do the player movement code, which is what we want to have happen, because that's the keyboard. And then, unfortunately, we still have on the analog sticks, they have not been set to controller is analog. And so actually we're going to do this player movement code 5 times. Now that would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that basically means the player, the little guy will move 5 times the distance he's supposed to move, and it will not be using the controller input properly. So really, we did not want to be doing this at all. Like, that's totally bogus and not at all right, and somehow we all missed it, myself included. And like I said, that was just a pure sort of oversight on my part, because I just assumed, oh right, we were setting the is analog. But now that I think about it, I believe what was actually happening in our Win32 layer is we only actually set is analog once they actually use that stick at all. And if they don't ever use the stick, it'll just be default to be not analog, which is totally fine. It just means that this is not okay at all. So at this point, we have to sort of think about what we actually want to do here. And it's something that I didn't really want to have to deal with quite yet, but at the same time, it's not really there's no reason we can't deal with it right now. It just doesn't fit in our collision detection sort of stuff. But so I kind of want to just think out loud a little bit about how we want to handle this going forward, because here's the thing that we actually want to be able to do. And to some extent, we don't really know whether we actually will ever need this in Handmade Hero. But we should think about it regardless of whether we need it or not, because it's something that can be done as sort of an abstract thought experiment. So basically, there's some number of controllers attached to the machine, right? There's, a keyboard, there might be an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller or something like this that are attached to the machine. And even if there's only one player, you kind of have to think about which of those controllers maps to that player, right? One school of thought would be all of the controllers always map to the player if there's only one player, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter what controller you pick up, you can switch between the keyboard and the controller freely, and it just kind of always takes the input from whichever ones are doing something, and that's what it does, right? And we can implement that pretty easily, and maybe that's something that we should do. But a wrench starts to get thrown into this if we start saying, what if we support 2 players on one machine? Like, suppose we want to be able to, and we find that the game can support, having the main hero character get joined by a second character. For example, if you want to plug in a second controller and you both play, or one person plays on the keyboard, one person plays on the controller, then you actually have a problem. And that problem is you don't know which controllers map to which people. If there's 2 characters on the screen and there's 3 controllers, the keyboard and 2 gamepads, let's say, which one maps to the hero and which ones map to the sidekick, right? Now, with gamepads themselves, there's a little bit of a hint. We could make it so that you push start on a gamepad to join in on that gamepad, right? And that's a fairly common and easily understood thing to have happen. And so, we could very, very transparently sort of implement that in the game, but there's still a catch. And the catch is, what happens with the keyboard? Because the keyboard doesn't really have a predefined start key, and a player who is perhaps unfamiliar with convention or anything like that doesn't necessarily know what to do when they're presented with with a keyboard and said, when you want to start the game, what exactly do you hit? And so you kind of need to introduce, if you want to go the start button route, you need to introduce some concept of what is the start button on a keyboard. And it's not as simple as just saying, okay, maybe we, have the keyboard, any key you press on the keyboard joins you as a keyboard player, because what if the person was trying to, get back to the main menu and they didn't necessarily know what to hit and they just hit a key and now they're playing and they just, there's a bunch of things that could go wrong there. And so it's really a very touchy problem. It's a problem that I kind of wish, again, people like Microsoft, if they actually thought things through ever, which they pretty much don't, they would have had some convention for setting up controllers in Windows such that this was not something that each game had to deal with in an ad hoc fashion and that players would have to learn separately for every game. You just have a concept of what the controllers are in your system and which ones you wanted to use that you could remap per game if you wanted to, or all those sorts of stuff. Really, the operating system is the right place to do that because it allows, players to configure things once for the most part and only really mess with that configuration on a per game basis if they really need to for some specific game, instead of having to do all of this configuration work or all of this learning in every single game they play. But what are you going to do? We have not had a good shepherd of the operating system for gaming pretty much ever. And so we're just in a position where we have to compensate for ourselves. And so what I want to do is I want to have something in Handmade Hero that is very easy and transparent for people to use, so they're not going to be very confused by how they have to do things. But I may also wish to support having multiple controllers. So I would say what I think we should probably do for now is say, let's assume that the way that the game works is that at any time you can push whatever the start button is in your controller, and we'll define one ourselves for the keyboard, and you will join the game, right? And I don't think that there really should be anything more complicated than that at the moment, so we'll just simply say that every controller that pushes a start button basically joins in, and any controller that pushes the start button again comes back out, right? So it's basically just free to join, free to leave. And we'll see how far that gets us because it's very, very simple and easy to understand. And if we find that we need to start introducing something more complicated, then we can do so later. Since we don't really know whether we're going to have 2 players or not, at the final game, whether the final game will really support 2 different players at the same time or not, I don't want to overthink it too much now, but I want to do something somewhat reasonable. So what we need to do then is we need to move our controller code such that when we process controllers, we have an idea of which controller maps to which character, right? And I just kind of said how I basically want that to happen. I want to basically use the start button as the thing that determines that feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this movement code out entirely, basically. And I'm going to put that in a separate place where we will execute it per player, basically. So I'm going to pull that out temporarily just to get it out of the way while I do some surgery on this particular piece of the code. So I'm just going to make a little holder here for it. And I'm going to go ahead and say that basically everything that happens from this player speed stuff down, like all of this basically, is all going to be code that's in the player movement stuff now, right? So here's the player movement stuff that gets out of the way. And then let's go ahead and take a look at what happens with these controller indexes. So for each controller, when we go through and do what we're going to do with it, we now essentially need to figure out how we're going to map controllers to players. And so what I want to do for that is I would like to go ahead and say, okay, for now, let's just say, since we don't have the concept of entities yet, let's at least say that we have, well, I'll just call it an entity for now. Let's say that we're going to take this player stuff here, this player P and D player P, right? Let's take those two and let's go ahead and say, let's pull them out into this structure so that we can have multiple players if we want to, and we don't have to just have one, right? Because this is all the state that we were using for the hero, right? That was all we actually needed. So if we want to, we could now have more of them, right? So if we wanted to have one per controller, we could certainly do something like this, where we basically said, okay, there can be an entity per controller, and I guess I'll just call these players for now. We could have as many as we wanted there, and I guess I need to actually be able to check what that array count actually is. Hold on a second. I don't actually remember what we called that array count there. That's not it. It's handmade platform.h. So where is that? There it is, game controller input. So what I want to do basically is just see what the size of that is. So I can basically say, all right, I want to do the array count of, you know, essentially one of these things, like so. I don't know if this is kosher, but I'm going to try it anyway. Basically say the array count of one of those, whatever it is. Is that legal? Are you okay with that? Oops. Mr. Compiler. Let's see here. Go to that. There we go. And right, we will have to deal with this as well, but it looks like it passed just fine, so that's just fine. So we now know that we've got as many players as there are controllers for now, and so that's totally fine. And then the other thing that I might do for now is I'll just say, okay, let's go ahead and assume that we have some kind of a player count here so that we know when we've got any of them, right? And so all I'm going to do is now all the stuff that we used to do for individual players, I will just do that for each player that currently exists, right? And so this was the initialization for the player, and so we want to do that initialization anytime there's a new player, right? So instead of initializing it just at startup, just for that first player, I'll go ahead and say, let's initialize those. We'll basically have a thing here which will say, you know, add player or something like this. Seems like a totally reasonable thing. So we'll do an add player up here, and what we'll do with add player is we'll just assert temporarily that we've got. You know what? You know what? I don't even think that's. I don't even know if I want to do that. I'm going to do it actually this way, and I'm just going to say that we've got the players here, and then we've got however many controllers there are. Actually, I'm going to say that we have player index for controller, like so, and we'll do that. And I'm actually going to say that we've got sort of a generic entity array here. I'm gonna back off on what I said previously. And I don't know how many of these we're going to have. I'm not going to do anything specific there for now. I'm just going to say we've got a bunch of them. So what I would like to do then is say, well, we've got entities, and the entities themselves are going to basically have some kind of concept of whether or not they are actually existing. Maybe we'll call this exists, right, at the moment. And then I'm going to say, all right, we've got a notion that for any individual player, any individual controller, we have a player index that's sort of assigned to that controller, for the time being. And so if I go ahead and do that, I could then say whenever I do add player, basically what it would actually be is just an initialized player. And initialized player would say whichever entity index you wanted to initialize. So basically if I had an entity like this, then I'm just going to do whatever that code was that I was doing to initialize the single one that we had, right? And instead of this being player P, obviously this is now just P. And this is just dp, so that's basically the top map position and the velocity, right? And so I'll go ahead and change that stuff here. And of course, we may be reusing an entity at this point, so what I'd also like to do is I'd also like to initialize it to 0 to clear out the entity structure, to 0 anything that wasn't actually there before, and then I will set its exists to true. So now we've got an entity, whatever we want to initialize a player, we can initialize it like so. So again, not thinking too hard about this, just want to start to pull it out a little bit. Not doing anything particularly fancy with the entities at all right now. I just want to be able to have more than one of them. So if I do that, then at the outset, of course, all of the entities will not exist, so that's fine. When we go to actually draw them, what is, oh, right, void, there we go. When we go to actually draw them here, and I guess this old player P is similarly going to be moved up to here. There we go. Let's do that. And this should also be moved as well. Of course, I might want to move that other one too. I have to think about where I want to process the camera code, basically. But what I'm doing here is just moving all of the code out that used to be based on player movement, now that I know that I'm going to do it multiple times. Okay, so now what I need to do is say, all right, we have a notion of the camera, right? And the camera has to follow the players around. But for our particular game, we won't probably allow split screen or anything because I don't really want to start shrinking the game world into corners of the screen or stuff like this. At least I don't think. Maybe I do. I've never seen a game do that, this type of game do that before. I've never seen a Zelda-like game have a split screen mode, but now that I think about it, is there really any reason not to do that? That's something to think about. All right. I'm gonna put a to-do in there. I'm gonna put a to-do in here and say, should we allow split screen? I don't know. Maybe we should. If this ends up being two-player, maybe we should allow split screen. That's a good question. Two-player is something I haven't thought at all about. I'm thinking about this mostly as a one-player game for all the design stuff I've done. But I like playing games with friends, so at some level, if it turns out to be interesting to have more than one player, maybe that is something we should do. I'm not sure. I think it's maybe more interesting if we don't, because it keeps the gameplay together and it keeps people working together, and that's usually a little more interesting, but I don't know. Who knows? So what we'll say for now, though, is we won't allow split screen, and so what we need to do for camera P is we'll basically say, all right, we have a camera following entity index. So we'll basically just say the camera's going to follow whatever entity this is set to, right? And so if that is set to something that's not 0, right? If that's basically, I'm going to say that if the camera following entity index is not equal to 0, basically, so if it's valid, which is basically what this is, then let's go ahead and grab that entity, whatever that entity is, right? Get entity. And in fact, I guess I could do this a little more cleanly even. So let's call camera following entity like that. We'll say let's get entity, and here's the entity that we want. I'll pass it the game state. And then we'll say if that's actually a valid entity, then we will just use that entity's p following tile, the abs tile z, right? And that seems pretty sane. Again, really nothing particularly interesting going on here. I'm literally just doing the most straightforward, simple mechanical work of pulling out some of this code. Like I said that I like to do. I like to wait till I've actually got some code, and then I always pull it out into things that are cleaner as I sort of go further. So when I do this, this allows me, why did I put this function here? It just allows me to do range checking or any other kind of checking that I want to do. I'd also like to reserve slot 0 to basically mean 0. So basically what I will do here is say if index is greater than 0 and index is less than game state, whatever the entity count is. And so for now, that's just array count. But we'll have to think about what we want to do with that a little later on. Yeah. And so what I want to do here is say also probably, well, no, I don't really need to assert that. So then we'll just do this, and we'll say that if it's within those bounds, then the entity is just going to be equal to the entities that's at that index in the array, right? So that'll get the entity for us. We now have a way to initialize the player as well. And so now what we can do is say, all right, let's go ahead and take the stuff where we were going to, let's see, what is going on here? Okay, so that if the camera is following entity, then we also need to do this stuff. And all of this stuff that we do here that used to be on the player P is actually going to be on the camera following entity, right? So that's basically going to be this. And yeah, that's really all we need to do. And what that diff is, I don't know if that actually happens again. Yes, it does. So that's going to be used for drawing here. So basically what we need to do is say if there is, this we'll probably have to do again because we were sort of reusing it here, and that's not going to work because we're going to actually have to have a loop here where we draw all the entities, like all of the heroes that are involved, basically, right? So if I go ahead and do that here, I'm going to have to do the diff again. So we might as well just put it there. All right, so I believe the diff is a v2. Is that right? No, it's tile map difference. So let's go ahead and grab that tile map difference. What was tile map difference? Handmade tile.h. Tile map difference. So tile map difference is basically just a vector. We can replace this entire thing with a 3D vector eventually. So replace this with a v3 once we get to v3, which, by the way, is what I wanted to do this week. So hopefully we'll get there. So anyway, all right, all well and good. We'll take one of these tile map differences for now, but eventually we'll change those into v3s because there's really no need for this class anymore. So now we've done that, and basically all I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop over all of the entities that we are simulating for now. Again, dumbest way possible. So this is not supposed to be code that you're thinking about right now. If you are thinking about this, that is bad. You want to be doing just the most straightforward thing. So basically we're going to go ahead and say entity index equals 0, entity index is less than array count entities. You know what, I don't really love doing array count entities, so I think I'm going to do entity count like so. So I'm going to say game state entity count, and then we just go ahead and do that. Now I don't actually know if I want to store entities in an array like that exactly, but for now I think that's actually totally fine. Because there's nothing particularly odd going out. And since this is going to march through them in order, I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is going to be a straight ahead loop. So we'll basically say that this is entities like that. And each time through the loop, I don't know why that just turned green, we will go ahead and increment the entity pointer as well. So this is just going to go through all the entities. If a particular entity exists, then we will just go ahead and draw it. And right now we only have hero bitmaps, so we're going to draw it as a hero. But in the future we would start to do stuff where we'd look at, see what kind of entity it was and draw it in a different way. So what I need here is I need the entity P to figure out where it is, and then everything else I believe should be just about fine. Now we've got this hero facing direction, which we'll have to put in the entity for now, but I'm not sure how we want to actually deal with that long term. So we'll just call this facing direction. And then we'll go ahead and say entity arrow facing direction here. And that may be just about it for the stuff that we need to do. Okay, so in here, this actually is probably better done not where it is right now. This is really what direction they were pushing, which is not really what we quite want it to do. So I think what we'd rather do is when we process the actual movement for the character and figure out what his velocity actually is, I think maybe then what we'll do is say, okay, take a look at that movement and say, you know, if maybe if DD player Y, you know, I'm trying to think of how it is. If basically we want to take DD player and use the direction, because remember DD player was basically the velocity of the player. So we have DD player is pointing in some direction, and that's the way that he's going. And what we want to do now is we want to say which quadrant is this vector in, right? So we want to see which of these quadrants he actually falls in most heavily. And so, you know, essentially what we could do is say, well, you know, if his y, you know, if his y direction, if the magnitude of his y is greater than the magnitude of his x, right, then he's going up or down. And if the magnitude of his x is greater than the y, then he's going left or right, and then we just check its sign. So I feel like that's probably the simplest way to do that now, but so I think I'll probably just do that. So what I'll say is, you know, if absolute value, which is an intrinsic that we'll also have to define, but if the absolute value of DD player y is greater than that of x, I think I might actually do less than. So we'll check x first, because I'd like it, if they're equal, I'd like him to use his y facing direction, just because I think that's a little more sensible. All right, so if the absolute value of the x is greater than the absolute value of the y, then I'm going to say that, so the hero is up or down in this case, right? That's, this is up. So if the DD player y is greater than 0, then it'll be that. And we'll say greater than, or, well, we'll say greater than 0. And then if, right, if the, where is that? If the hero's moving down, then we'll do this. There we go. And then we could do the same thing here. So, and so if he's moving left, which is that case, and if he's moving right, which is that case. So I believe that should do it. So that will determine his facing direction from his velocity. And in the case where his velocity drops to 0, he'll just point in the direction down. Now, I guess, you know what we could actually do? We could do something a little fancier too. We could say, well, we'll only set it in the case where it actually isn't 0, right? So if they're actually 0, we'll just leave it the same if we can't tell which direction he's going. So it's whatever it last was. That might be a little saner. And so we could say something like, you know, if DD player, yeah, if, well, yeah, you know, if they're both 0. So I don't know, let's do it, sure. Let's say that that's what it is, and then we'll go from there. So we'll do that for now, and of course we'll have to go test that. I just kind of slammed that in there. But that means we need an absolute value intrinsic, which is basically to say what is the magnitude of this value without the sign bit, right? And that, again, is something that the compiler will actually generate for us, I believe. Absolute value is just f_abs normally, and that should give us the absolute value directly. And it should not actually have to call any C library functions. It should be a direct thing where it outputs direct to the code stream. And we'll check that later. All right. What is the, oh, right, that's supposed to be a real 32. There we go. So let's take a look here. So now when we do this stuff, we can get rid of this. And we haven't wired anything up yet, so really what we should expect to see is nothing on the screen, but I just want to get all this stuff compiling first. We've got camera following entity. That should be a P there. There we go. And the entity, there we go, needs a parentheses. And so now I think if I go ahead and restart this guy, we should have nothing, which is exactly what I would expect. Yes. So now we have to actually add an entity. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to say, all right, for a given controller, if that controller maps to an actual player, then we will route the control to the player, and if it does not, then we will just sit there waiting for it to hit the start button, right? So what we'll say controller start ended down, right? If they push down on the start button, I believe that's what our definition, platform, there we go. Start button, yeah. So if the start button went down, then we will go ahead and create a new player, right? Initialize player. But if not, then we will just assume that, well, I guess like I said, I gotta check it. We'll assume that we don't have to do anything. And then if we actually are mapped to a player, then what we will do is actually do the player movement. And what we can kind of do here is say, well, if we got this DD player stuff now, we could also start handling is analog. What we could do is say we've got DD player, which is the sort of the movement direction for the player, like so. We could just now say if the controller is analog, then let's go ahead and actually use that stick average x, stick average y, if that makes sense. Okay. So stick average x, stick average y, DD player equals that. There we go. And so in theory, that should get us, let's see, I don't want to do that yet. Yeah, illegal events without actually, okay, so we're all good there. So what we now need to do is we need to re-enable the player movement code by calling it, but first let's actually do the thing that actually initializes the player. If this ends down, then what we'll do is say, okay, what we need to do is basically get that controller index. So where is that controller index? That's not where it is, handmade.h. So we've got this array right here, which is what I'm going to do in this array is store for every controller what player it maps to, right? So what I want to do is say, what I guess I want to do is just say entity, controller entity, or controlling entity. And then I want to say get entity, player index for controller, of whatever controller this is, right? So there's the controller index, there we go. When I get the entity based on that, if I get one back, then I know, I guess I should actually have this a little bit inverted to make it a little cleaner, controlling entity. If I get one back, then I know that I just need to control the entity that I already have. If I don't, then I need to wait for the start button, and potentially if it went down, I need to actually go ahead and create that new entity, right? Which I can totally do like so. Actually, I don't know if that needs to pass anything but the entity at the moment. Yeah, I guess it doesn't even need that. So really all it needs is for me to do that, like so. And then, player index for controller, sorry, is there. And then, in theory, that should allow us to create a new player by pressing the start button on any controller that we want to. Now, in theory, we already mapped start to an arbitrary thing for the keyboard, but I don't actually know what it was, and of course we never actually wrote any of this down because we haven't actually made like a little screen that says press spacebar or press anything. So let's take a look. It's escape is the start button. That's not useful. I think escape should be the back button, don't you? Doesn't really make any sense. I'm not sure why I picked that. I suspect I wanted them this way, so you'd push back to do it. I mean, back is like escape. They go backward. Yeah, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Not important right now. These are all decisions we'll make quite a bit further down the road. Anyway, so if I hit the spacebar, well, we should just, you know, I mean, obviously what you should do at that point is crash, because you definitely want to crash immediately upon hitting the spacebar. So what did I do here? Oh, duh. Yeah, that's totally, yeah, again. Not particularly good on a Monday, people. It's not going smoothly here on our Monday. So when we initialize the player, I need to actually, that means, you know, if there was no index to the player, it means I need to make a new index for the player, right? I need to, like, add an entity. That's kind of obvious. I don't know why I didn't think of that, but anyway. So what we need to do here is actually say add entity, right? So that we can actually get a new one that we can initialize, because it's coming back null to say that there wasn't one assigned. I can't just go ahead and call it that way. So let's go ahead and do that like this. And for now, this is not actually how I really want to do it eventually, but like I said, we don't have to super care for now because we're not really trying to do the entity system at this point. We're just trying to put something in so we can start to be a little more realistic about what's going on there. So when I add an entity here, all I really have to do is just increment the entity count, right? Entity count, and say that whatever the game state entity slot is that's next, we will go ahead and grab it, right? So that's basically that. And maybe what I can do is say, you know, I don't know, maybe I don't want to clear this. I think, you know, I could clear it in add entity. Maybe that's the best place to do it. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe, you know, maybe I want to do this. Something like that. Yeah. 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 Well, anyway, so there was another bug there I just saw too, which is that I think this was like that originally. I don't know, maybe it wasn't. Which would mean that this would set that to 0, and then we'd immediately write to a null pointer. So that's no good. But that's beside the point for now. So let's go ahead and see what's going on here. We're going to get that guy out there, which is good. I want to assert here that we're not out of entities, which would be good. So I want to assert that the entity count is less than the array count of the entity array. Entities, like so. Here we go. And yeah, that's actually not called entity, it's called entities. So there's our entities array, and let's take a look if we maybe crash a little less than we used to. There's our guy. So that's good. And now we just need to actually hook him up so that we can, you know, control him again. So then we've got a thing here which is move player, right? Or something like this, or move hero. I don't know what we want to call that exactly. Let's call it move player. So for move player, all we need to do is take whatever the entity is that's the player that we're actually trying to move, and then we take the acceleration that he's supposed to have, right? And so I guess we'll call this accelerate player, or something like this. Now, I guess it's really move player, because you're passing in whatever you want the acceleration to be this frame. And so really, it's going to do the movement as well. It's going to actually do that work there. So what we want to do here is say, all right, that entity P is now going to be the thing that we're working on. And so let's go ahead and go through here and see where we're at. There we go. Controller. Okay, so that's just that right there is just actually a speed modifier. We'll have to think about how we want to do that. I'll get rid of that for now. Got the D player P, so that's also in the entity now, which is fine. So we'll just use the entity that we are on. New player P. So let's see. This you could just do together. The old player P equals entity P, and the new player P just equals the same thing, like so. Not sure why we need to do that. We'll have to think about why we're even doing that. And then, of course, we need the time step. We need that DT as well, because that's what we need to control everything. So however much time we want to advance, we'll do it like so. We'll take that derivative from the entity structure instead of from the game state again. Again, this is really just, there is nothing really all that interesting about what's going on here. It is straightforward transformation, just to basically pull the stuff out now that we know that we're going to have multiple, so we need to basically, yeah, know exactly what we're doing as far as that's concerned. All right, and so now we're going to need that tile map as well, the tile map that it's moving on, which I guess is not necessarily, so we've got the game state which we could pass directly, which I think we probably just want to pass the game state and let it get the tile map out of the game state. That seems like a more sensible thing to do. So basically out of the game state, we'll get the world. Now maybe we don't need the game state per se. It's possible that we could do just pass the world and have things just use the world, but I'm not sure about that yet, and it doesn't really matter at this particular point in time. So let's take a look here. We've got our player width, player height stuff, which is how we were drawing him before. And technically that's really a property of the player at this point. It's not necessarily one that we're going to keep, but I'm going to go ahead and move that out because really stuff like what the size of the collision is for the player will be part of the entity eventually. Well, not necessarily part of the entity, but part of the entity's type at the very least, depending on how we choose to implement that. And so player width and heights should get moved out as well. They should not really be things that are assigned here, right? They should be things that are actually assigned in initialized player, so you can have players that are different sizes seems like a pretty reasonable thing that you might want to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say width and height for now, like so. And there we go. So then inside the entity, we need to put those width and height, like that. There we go. And now everybody who uses those basically has to now use the entity's width and the entity's height. So player width is now entity width, like so. And hey, look, we need to do it there too. So that's fine. Oops, that's not what I wanted. And then we'll also do player height. We'll go entity height. So now we've pulled that out, like so. Okay. Let's keep going. Almost there. Let's see here. We need to do these as just entity P. So I guess we should just wholesale place this. Game state player P becomes entity P, like that. It's a bunch of those, so we'll just get all of those guys. And then D player P, same thing. Game state D player P becomes entity DP. There we go. And hero facing direction is now entity facing direction. And now, again, you know, I say there's nothing special about what's going on here, but you'll notice there is sort of something a little special going on here, which is just that we're not overcomplicating things. This is why I don't like doing any stuff, you know, pre-design or pre-object orientation or any of that sort of stuff. I just like things to get created as they go, because you'll notice all of the code is basically telling us what we need to do. I'm not having to think real hard about this stuff. We're just waiting till we get to the point where it's clear that we need something to happen, and then we do it, right? And so, you know, it's like, okay, we're at the point where I started wanting to think about the fact there was controllers and entities, controllers and players that were mapped together, so I just need to have those now, so we just made them. And if each step of the way you just keep it simple like that, the code and the needs of the code will always guide you. And really the only way you can go wrong is by ignoring what the needs of the code are and like trying to keep shoehorning stuff together when it's clear that you need a new abstraction or something like that. But you know, like I said, it is really good if you can always try to code this way, where you always let yourself get in a situation where you need something before you write it, rather than pulling things out. And so now we're at least pretty sure that we've got entities that have stuff in it that is actually what we need. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is we don't actually ever call the movement code, and so we want to do that. What we want to do is for each of those controller index guys, what we do want to do is if a controller is ever controlling an entity, we do want to actually move them. I don't know that that's where we're going to necessarily do that move right now, but eventually we'll think about where we want to do that. But for now, this is totally fine. We'll pass that DD player that we computed. We'll pass the controlling entity that's supposed to be controlled, and there we go. So now we should actually be able to control our guy again. By hitting the spacebar, he should come in, and then we should be able to control him. However, I do not seem to be able to control him. Why do I not seem to be able to control him? Clearly, I have forgotten something. Let me go ahead and stop us here. Well, you know what? Let's stop us actually here. There we go. So I come in, and I push down. And we're not actually getting that passed to us. Why am I not ever seeing that? Initialize player. Oh, yeah, we forgot one more thing. We actually have to remember when we initialize the player, we need to actually set what entity it actually was. So that's a good point right there. So let's go ahead and do that as well. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure what I want to do about this exactly. I'm not sure about this. Do I want these to be pointers right now? I don't think I really do. We'll see. So what I'm going to do here is just say that add entity function would have, it's going to have to return the index of the entity. And I'm not sure if I want to introduce like entity handles or anything like that at this point yet. So I'm just going to kind of do something pretty basic here. And this is something that I definitely want to think about a little later on. But anyway, there's the entity index like so. It'll clear it out like that. And we'll kind of leave it as such. So the controlling entity goes ahead and does the add entity call. Now it has to actually do a get entity. So what we'll do is we'll say entity index, like so, and then we'll do this get entity, and let's see, game state entity index. And there's a bunch of things I don't quite like about this, but that's okay for the moment. And then what we need to do is just kind of store back that player index or controller. Because the reason that I couldn't control the guy is we never actually stored back what entity it ended up initializing for him, right? So now that we've actually added him, we can actually start controlling him because we won't have this problem where we add him and then we never mark the fact that the controller is linked to him. So there he... Oh, what happened there? Break? Let's see here. Oh, yep, got one more bug. Boy, it's been a buggy Monday. I don't know if anyone else feels that way. It's just been a stupid Monday. So the other thing that we do have to do, too, is I said I wanted to reserve entity slot 0 as like a null entity slot. And the reason I like to do that is I just like 0 to mean uninitialized. So if someone has a handle to an entity and the entity handle is 0 or something, it should mean that there's no entity there. But if you'll notice, we're actually not reserving entity slot 0. So what we really want to do is we really want to do something like this. When the game actually starts up the first time, as soon as it starts up, what we want to do is say, okay, reserve entity slot 0 basically for the null entity, right? And so this is the null entity index, right? Oops, entity index. And it's not actually used. So I'm just going to say, note, Casey, reserve entity slot 0 for the null entity, which will just be an entity that you should never really write to or get. All right, so that's fine. And now I'm hoping that we'll actually be able to control this fellow. Let's see, where is what I was trying to do? Okay, so we set, oh, wow. The typos today. Maybe it's because I don't have my almond milk. It seems like that's entirely plausible. I don't know, maybe it's not. But did you see that typo? I don't know if you guys saw it too. You probably already did on the thing. Why can't I find it? Controlling entity. There it is. I didn't actually assign the value. I cut and pasted the thing in, but I didn't actually assign it. All right, so finally, we hopefully will be able to control it. And of course, I still can't control it. Wow, just, you know, some days you have to fire yourself, you know, if it's just like, what's going on, people? So yeah, so we're still not getting any control input there. What is the problem here? Let's find out. So I come in here, and I am actually doing this. So why do I never see a down control? Why do I never hit any of these cases if I actually did create the entity and am actually now calling that code? What's going on with that? That's very strange. What I'm going to do here is I am going to go ahead and follow through the pipeline. Get controller. So yeah, let's see what happens here. Get controller. Interesting. So it wasn't controller 0, which I thought was the keyboard, that actually got initialized. Man, it's like all these typos on one line. How is that even possible? How? You know, it's just, I guess that, I'd like to talk that up to the fact that I'm streaming, but that may just be because I'm just dumb today. I don't know if you can really chalk that up to streaming, you know? With that many typos, I feel like at some point, that ain't the stream, that's just your brain not actually operating. So I think we've finished our festival of typos. And now, hopefully, we will actually have our dude. And so now, I think we're actually working properly. And of course, our guy's movement's going to be a lot more swimmy because he's only having his routine run once instead of 5 times. I'm seeing that's a little... Oh, you know what, too? When we're now doing that facing direction calculation, I realized we're using the acceleration for that, and we really want that to be his velocity now, right? And so, let's see here. There we go. D player. And so we really want that to be his velocity if possible. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And oops, and that's just a DP now. so. I should also probably change that D player to just be DDP. So DD player is DDP, like that. And there we go. So now we've got all of that stuff worked out. Okay. Now, if I go in and I create my dude, see how the facing direction works. Still busted. What did I do? What did I do? So DP. Let's see. Oh, still got it in here. Yeah, got to do this guy. Let's see. Go. Okay. And now I think the facing direction should be correct, hopefully. Yes, it does appear so. And there we go. I don't know if I actually want it to be based on the velocity like that. I think, well, we're going to do an animation controller for him, and that'll probably have more of an opinion about that. But anyway, our constants now need to be retuned, certainly, because that's just a little too swimmy, to say the least. So I'm going to go ahead and crank those values up a little higher than what they were before. Our acceleration and so on. So let's go ahead and make our you know, sort of faux drag here quite a bit higher. And we'll make this quite a bit higher. And we'll just see how that is. Oops. See how that is. He's a little too fast now, so let's turn that down a bit. Let's see. That feels a bit better, but I'm gonna stiffen him up just a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're getting somewhere. I think we're getting somewhere. Yeah. That's much better. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now we're feeling pretty good. And our sticking problem should be much exacerbated now. I'm thinking that now that we've gotten rid of the fact that we were calling the loop 5 times, which would have helped our sticking problem quite considerably, because it meant that only the first time would it actually try to move into it, and then the other 4 times it would try to move directly down. I'm imagining we should stick, yeah, like right away. Okay. So that's what I would have expected. That's what I would have expected to see the first time. And now it all makes sense why I wasn't seeing, because that's what you should have been seeing. You should have been seeing crazy sticking behavior. And the fact that we weren't was kind of actually bizarre to me. I was like, it didn't feel right. And so that's the reason why. And so now we fixed it. So that's good. So now tomorrow we can get back to doing our player movement stuff. And now we can also have multiple players in the game. So that's kind of fun. We could, I suppose, if we wanted to, also do something strange where we actually use different colors for the different players or something like this. I don't know. Haven't thought about that much. But anyway, point being, now we've actually got that straightened away. That's just one bug that is out of our way for later. And we are just about out of time, so I'm glad that was like right on time. So maybe it was good that we had those typos in there, because otherwise we would have finished much too early and had to start something new and then not been able to finish it. So we lined up quite good. And so now we've got multiple players. I probably should have brought a gamepad in here so I could actually test multiple players, but I guess we'll save that for tomorrow. Although, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. That's long enough to get a controller. I'll be right back. Probably should just leave a controller in here. Let's see here. Okay. Mr. Controller. I guess we'll just plug that right in here. Let's see. I don't actually know. There it is. Hey, look. It's all good. And the D-pad works. So does the analog stick. How about that? All right. We're in good shape, people. Which reminds me, at some point, we need to get back to do our dead zone work, because there's some stuff that we never actually did with the dead zone. Yay, multiple handmade heroes. They're pretty cute. Look at how cute they are. They're like twins. All right. With that, we have gotten to the Q&A, ladies and gentlemen. So if you could, please prefix your questions with Q:, so I can see them. And try to keep it to things we've done on today's stream or on a previous stream. If you want to ask off-topic questions, that's totally fine for before the stream. But please do come about 15 minutes early to before when the stream's supposed to start. If you want to ask those off-topic questions, I will answer them all then. But if for the official Q&As, please try to keep it on topic because these are the ones that are recorded. On multiple players split screen, what kind of screen resolution are you going to be working with for each one? You may not have enough available on all platforms. Well, I don't know if we're going to do split screen. That was just something I was thinking. I was like, I've never seen a Zelda-y split screen game before. I don't know if I want to do that or not. That's just total conjecture. We'll cross that bridge much further down the line when we actually start thinking about if we actually want any multiplayer gameplay in here or not. Like the game may just not make sense that way, or it may make a lot of sense that way when we actually go to play it. So you can actually see something else happening here that we'll talk about later, which is you notice he should be in front of the guy, but he's behind the guy, and that's because we're just drawing them in whatever order the entities are. And so that's kind of an interesting thing like to think about, because obviously when we're doing the renderer, this is a little teaser almost for like, well, we have to have a solution for that, right? So what are we going to do? And and so we'll be looking at some stuff about how we want to do that sort of thing in terms of sorting and all that sort of stuff. You once said that visualizing problems is never a wasted thing, so wouldn't it be very helpful to render the collision detection for better understanding of what actually happens? Yes, but we haven't gotten to the point where we can really do visualizations because we don't have any rendering code. So basically, we're kind of in a state where we're just going to do basic versions of things. And then once we actually implement our full collision detector, we will do all of that work after we have the renderer in place, which can do things like text on the screen and lines and stuff, which is what we would need for actual visualization. Are entities just for players, or is it going to handle all game objects? Well, it'll handle all game objects eventually, but right now it's only players because we actually haven't gotten to the point where we're thinking about entities for real. We're just right now thinking about having guys that move around. So we don't think about objects at the moment. We haven't gotten anywhere near objects right now. How will input be handled when two players trigger an action at the same time? Well, I don't think we're really going to have much problem with that because it's not a versus game, so it should be relatively fine. If they both trigger at the same time, it's just whichever entity is the main, is probably the hero entity will probably take precedence. Who is the camera following with multiple players? If you leave the screen without and then follow with the other, will it work as expected? So I'm thinking, I mean, like I said, these are questions that don't really make any sense to ask right now because they would depend on the game. So we have to decide what we want for these sorts of things. Right now, I think we just want the camera to follow an entity. And in fact, what I probably should do, since we set it up to do this, but we never actually used it, is we have the camera following entity thing, right? We should probably set that to whatever player gets added first. So when we do initialize player, what we should probably do is say something like, if there isn't a following entity, right, then there is now, right? Or something like if get entity, right? If there isn't a valid entity that the camera's following, then the camera should follow this entity, right? Yeah, and so again, we kind of want this to be, this, and actually pass a game state. Game state, like so, right? And entity star entity, get entity. Yeah, so let's just do that because now that way the camera will follow whoever joins the game first. It's, probably the easiest thing to make sure that we still have our camera actually working to some degree, right? So there we go. Oops. So let's check that, make sure that works. Let's say I come in here and I go off the screen. Now I'm on the second screen and I go off the edge and I go here. Now this guy, if we have another entity who comes in, he should still be back at the start, right? If he joined. There. Okay. That's pretty funny. But why are we still drawing him? Why are we drawing him still on that Z? That's pretty odd, don't you think? Oh, because we don't actually check. That's why. That's pretty interesting. You'll notice that right here, when we draw our entities, we don't check to see if they're on the same Z as the camera. We just draw all the entities who would be in that zone. We would just draw them. Yeah, so we actually we want to do a check here. I mean, this is basically culling, right? So we want to do culling of entities based on Z camera view, right? Because otherwise, yeah, that's pretty funny. When you've decided to have multiple players, you decided to make these entities. Why didn't you just call it character or player? Will this be used on other things as well? Yeah, I mean, I just don't know what I want to do with that yet, because the reason I didn't call it players was because I don't even know when I did that if the players are all playing the same kind of thing. Because like I said, I've only really been thinking about this as a single player game. So I don't know if the entities are all even if all the players are all controlling the same kind of thing. So I just decided it's entities. It's something they're controlling. And I don't even want to know what it actually is at this point. I know one of them's the hero, but I don't know what the other ones are, so I just called it entities. Just so I didn't have to think about it. Let's see. Where did all the doors go? They're all still there, aren't they? I was walking in and out of them. How do you make the characters not to run through the trees? Well, we haven't really talked about collision detection much. That stuff back there isn't actually part of the game. That's just a bitmap that we had put back up there. It's this test background bitmap, which is not even really supposed to be in there, right? And so really, we've got, instead of this draw bitmap, we had a thing in here that would clear it. We were just using that to basically clear our screen. So if you take a look at it here, and I come on, right, we were just using that as a backdrop to clear the area where the player, what the player was standing on. But actually, the tile map is only the actual white and sort of black areas. I can show you if we get rid of this, right? This is actually what we actually have drawn. And so, you know, we've only really got a tile map here that's got stuff, you know, it doesn't have any sort of other things to collide with. It's just, you know, pretty basic. And so once we actually get to doing our world generation, those trees will actually be represented in the map. And so, yeah, those trees are not there right now, is I guess what I would say. They were just a pretty backdrop to leave on there. Well, we had it on, it's prettier with it than without it, so that's why it's there. But that's not actually part of it. So yeah, let me go ahead and I like having the bitmap there. It's just kind of pleasant, so I'm going to leave that in for now. Why are we doing physical-based movement, controlling the players with forces, instead of just controlling the velocity? Doesn't this add unwanted lag in the player controls? It adds wanted lag in the player controls. I like the player to have a little startup. I don't like it if the thing just starts moving at full velocity right away. And I feel like there's a lot of precedence for that. Like, I feel like a lot of games that feel good have a bit of that slop in them. That you don't just go full speed when you immediately start. And so that's why we have it in there, because it actually feels much better when it's in there. It just feels a lot more natural, and it's more enjoyable. Will we be doing any image manipulation with code? Yes, we will be doing lots of image manipulation with code. Any reason to catch failing to load art assets? Yes, eventually we will be we will be doing that very specifically. That was kind of a weird. Wait a minute. That was kind of a little weird. I want to make sure I've got these ifs right. Sorry, I got distracted by the movement of the guy. That looks correct. If dpx... it's not quite correct though, is it? Because they could be equal and just not 0. So what we actually wanted to do was do this, right? If entity dpx equals 0 and entity dpy equals 0, then we don't set it, right? So note Casey, oops, leave facing direction, whatever it was. Otherwise, then we go ahead and set it based on the other two. Because otherwise, if you were moving diagonally, it wouldn't set it, which is not at all what I wanted. All right, so now we're good. Yeah, much better. Okay. But anyway, any reason to catch failing to load art assets? Yes. Later on, we will be doing a lot more of that because we'll sort of be showing how to do more of an asset loading pipeline that's not really just a load bitmap call, right? And at that point, we'll have a lot of stuff where we may have written things in code that haven't been drawn yet. And so it won't even be failing to load art assets so much as the art assets don't even exist at all. And so we need to handle that because we need to be able to develop without having art assets yet for particular things. So we'll want to have like fallback art assets and stuff like that even. So we'll be talking a lot more about that when the time comes. Is the notion of having all the entities in the same array just a simplification for now, or is it actually something that will stick for long? The way we're adding and referring to entities probably won't stay around for long, but the concept of having a big block of entities in an array probably will be possibly even what we ship with. Why do I not use an autocompiler? Well, it's a little bit tough to do an autocompiler because if we did auto... I assume you mean that it compiles anytime I save or whatever. It may actually run the code in a state that I don't want it to and break our currently running game. So I don't know that I necessarily want that. But it's not necessarily a bad idea. I just don't know if I want it. How would disconnected controllers mid-game be gracefully handled? Well, really... I don't think we have to do much to gracefully handle them because if a controller gets disconnected, they can just plug it in again, right? So all we would really have to do is just put something up on screen saying, please reconnect controller, right? We're not doing anything right now that would cause any kind of breakage if a controller was disconnected. I guess if a controller ran out of batteries, you might need a way to stop using that controller and start using the keyboard. But what we could do is just anytime a controller gets disconnected, then that player is just in kind of limbo for a bit, and anyone who pushes start could like take them over, for example. There's a lot of ways we could handle it. We'll see again when the game is up. We don't really know. When comparing a float to 0, shouldn't you be checking you're within a tolerance instead? No, because we don't actually care. If these values aren't exactly 0, then we can just actually use whatever the small velocity is to determine the facing direction. But if they happen to be exactly 0, then we literally can't determine the facing direction because that's the only time that the hero isn't facing some direction. And so at that point, we have to kind of just leave it alone. Will there be diagonal movement sprites for the hero? Doubtful. I do not expect so. Not very many questions tonight. seem to be question free. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a good thing. Maybe that means we can end early. Everyone can go to bed for a sleepy Monday. Can go to bed early tonight. I'll stay on stream for a couple more minutes though, just to see if there's any more questions. Let's see. Nope, that looks like it. That looks like the end of the Q&A. Oh, no. Let's see. Since small velocities were brought up, are we going to account for small inputs, i.e. controller dead zones? Well, we actually already do clip to the controller dead zone a little bit. So in Win32 Handmade, when we actually prepare the input to send to the game, you'll notice that we actually do dead zone processing right. Let's see here, right here with the Win32 process X input stick value. You can see that we basically have here a thing that clips values to the dead zone, and some people were kind of grumpy because they were like, the dead zone should be circular, but I actually thought about this quite a bit, and I'm 99% positive that you definitely don't want the dead zone to be circular in this game. So I'm pretty sure we actually do want a square dead zone, but it's also on my list to write some dead zone visualization stuff on stream so you can kind of see, and that will explain a little bit maybe more why I think that the dead zone should definitely be square. But I'm pretty sure not only that the dead zone is actually physically square, meaning that it's square on the controller, and that's the part that we'll visualize, but even if it's not, I think even if the dead zone is physically circular, I still think we probably want it to be handled square. About storing entities in an array again, it seems like there are possibilities for easily having massive operations on all the entities. Will this be exploited? I don't think that probably will be able to be exploited. I mean, it might be, but I'm not thinking probably that it would be. And the reason for that is I suspect that most of our work will actually revolve around not processing all entities every frame. Because, you know, if we have 10,000 entities in the world or something, you don't want to be processing all of them every frame if they're not on the screen. And so we're going to have a bunch of stuff to do there, and I don't think that we'll end up optimizing for bulk updating of lots of entities. I think we'll optimize for updating entities at different time intervals based on what they need to be doing at that time. Let's see. Caught up quick with the YouTube archives. A couple of things that weren't completely clear. The indirection for function calls. Can you be more specific on that, though? I'm not sure what you mean by that. And why we didn't use the bitmap masks directly. Well, I'm not sure how we could use the bitmap masks directly. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because the problem with the bitmap masks is that they don't tell us how to get things into the location that we actually need them to be, right? So the bitmap mask does, in fact, tell us what we would mask to get the value, but it doesn't tell us how to shift it to get it to where we need it. So we need to call find least significant set bit to do that, right? And then once we have that, since there's no such thing as a rotate in C, we have to shift it down and then shift it back up again anyway. So we don't actually need the masks at that point because it's free for us to just do the mask after we shifted it down. I'm not sure if everyone followed that originally, but so I'll just say it again. So what we need to do is we need to shift the value from where it is to where it should be. But we don't know, because we don't know what the values are here, red, green, blue mask. We had to ask for them by doing find least significant bit. We don't really have any idea whether the red shift will be up or down from where the red is. So we don't know whether it'll shift left or shift right. So what we need to do is we need to shift it all the way down first, and then shift it all the way back up, doing a left and a right shift, basically, because we have to do a left and a right shift already. I'm sorry, well, right shift first and then a left shift, right? If we had a rotate, so we could just say shift either positive or negative direction, then we'd be able to use the mask directly. We'd use the mask and then shift the difference between where it is and where it needed to be. But since we don't have one, it's free for us to just use OXFF, which allows us to mask directly with the same value every time and not have to use any of this stuff, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Are there any games that you have personally developed that are available to the public? Are you talking about games that I designed and made myself? No. There are thousands of games with my code in them that are available to the public. If you want to find them, you can go take a look at, for example, here is some relatively, I don't actually know if this is a comprehensive list, but this is all of the games that are on this page anyway. All use my code in them because they use the animation system that I wrote. I do not design games for a living. I'm not a game designer. I'm a game programmer. So you're not likely, or even really, it would not be possible to find any game out there that I have designed. Only games that have my code in them. Oh, and also, I guess there's a lot more now that I think about it too. Since I did a bunch of work on Bink 2, I don't know. I wouldn't count this as much because I was more like just the person who did a bunch of tech research for Jeff on it. But I also, let's see. I don't know if this list is segregated by Bink 1 and Bink 2. Because a lot of these would be Bink 1 games. So, but yeah, anything that uses this for video also has obviously my code in it too at this point. Although I think it wouldn't actually have my code in it per se, because I suspect that, well, I don't know, maybe it would. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, since I did a bunch of research work on this, I'm not sure how much actual code is still in Bink 2 that I wrote. Because as they've refined it over time, I'm assuming that they replaced stuff that I did with more optimized stuff, but I'm not sure. But I did a bunch of work on this project and defining how it would work, and also I wrote the tools, the Viz tools that they still use internally to develop it. So there's that. Okay, so clarification on what the person was asking for: indirection for function calls. So you're talking about why we use the macros here. So the reason that I do these macros is because I like to make it so that I don't have to change. I always do this for function pointers because that means that anyone who defines a thing of that type always gets the same function signature. That's why I do the macros. It's not particularly necessary here. If you didn't want to do it here, it'd be totally fine because there just aren't that many. It's a one-off sort of thing, so it's not a big deal. But when we do stuff where there's going to be potentially a lot more functions that have to have the same signature, then it becomes a lot more important. So you don't have to do it, but it's how I write that code. Will I be waiting for John to complete his presentation tomorrow? I set the start time for Handmade Hero to 8:30 tomorrow to give him an hour and a half of time instead of an hour to complete. But no, we'll be starting at 8:30, so I won't hold it over after that. But I did try to move it so that hopefully we won't conflict too much if we do. Can you explain what you mean by dead zone on the controller? Yes. So basically what happens is these controller guys here, these analog sticks, the way that they actually work is there's a thing in there called a potentiometer that I don't really, since I don't understand hardware hardly at all, like I'm not a hardware guy at all. Like if you handed me a soldering iron, I'd probably just burn myself with it. But basically there's some things in there, I guess, called potentiometers, which are designed to read off where the analog stick is. And obviously there are springs in there as well that are designed to pull the analog stick back to the center when you let go of it. Now, apparently neither of these processes is quite perfect, as you might expect. The springs maybe don't quite pull the stick back to an exact center position every time. I mean, it's physical, maybe it can't be made to be that good or that accurate. And also the potentiometers may have drift and they may not be calibrated properly or all sorts of other things, right? And so what ends up happening is, in order to determine whether the stick is actually been moved away from the center, because remember, if the stick's at the center, we don't want to do anything. We only want to move the character when the stick moves away from the center. In order to determine whether the stick has been moved away from the center, we can't just say, well, if it's not equal to 0, then it must not be in the center. We have to actually use a range of values from negative something to positive something, basically, that all are considered being in the center. And that's what's called the dead zone. It's basically a zone that's considered effectively that the stick is not moving, even though the stick is returning values that are not 0. And if you want to see a demonstration of this, actually, you can see this probably pretty clearly. If we go ahead and say, set a breakpoint inside Win32 Handmade, and we say, okay, let's go ahead and see what the value is. I'm not even touching the controller, sitting on the table, right? So let's go in there and take a look at what the actual controller values are. I'll just set a breakpoint, right? So in here we'll say, go ahead and set the breakpoint and see what this actually are. So the value that came back from Windows when we said, give us the state of the controller, right, was this pad thing. And what it actually had is it actually has these values here. Well, actually, those are pretty good. That's all actual zeros. That seems crazy. Is that actually true? I don't know if I believe that. That seems kind of hard to believe, doesn't it? Which controller are we looking at here? Is it just me, or is that kind of hard to believe? So I guess you can have a demonstration of it, because this controller is like dead on, which is pretty awesome. Let's see if let's just verify that that's true. I'm going to hold it over to the side here. Stop it. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then I let go. Well, okay, so there you go. Now you can actually see it in action. So I'm putting the controller down on the table, and you can see that value is for the left thumbstick's X position, right? If you actually look at what it is, it's 420. But I'm not actually moving the stick. So, that's what you're trying to guard against there. And you can see that it kind of drifts around, actually. It's unreliable what that number is. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do when we talk about the dead zone. We're trying to make sure that that isn't a problem. Do controllers have an outside dead zone? I don't think so. I mean, well, for certain types of games, it may be true that controllers, the values that they return around the circle is not perfectly circular, and you might want to try and deal with that. For our purposes, we don't really care super much about that. But yeah, I mean, once we actually go to do the dead zone visualization stuff, it's definitely something that we can look at just to make sure that what we're getting is relatively clean. But I don't know that we'll have to really do much about that. That's typically less of a problem than the center stick's dead zone. Trireme Rufus is asking you, and with the 32-bit value, then use what you get. So, okay, he's still talking about the bitmap loading code question where I was trying to explain it. I'm not sure how to explain it other than how I already did. So, try to imagine, right, what happens here. We load this bitmap file. Now, we know that we need to output something that looks like this. This is actually this is what we have to do, right? So we load this, and we get back a red mask that is some random value. If we and with the red mask, right? So we've got we got the bitmap color anded with the red mask, is what you're saying, right? We now know that we have just the 8 bits of red. That works just fine. But how do we get it to be right here? How do we move it to this location? Right? How would you do it? You can't shift it left to move it to that location because you don't know that it's actually to the left of where it is in the bitmap color. And you can't shift it right because you don't actually know if it's to the right where the bitmap color is. So there is no actual way to write this code such that you just did the and then did a shift unless you had a shift that could go by positive or negative values, which we don't have, or a rotate, right? We don't have that. So what we have to do is the mask is not important. The mask doesn't matter at all. No one cares about the mask. What matters is the shift. And what we have to do in order to make sure we shift to the right place is shift down so that we align it all the way at the bottom so that we know that it's been shifted all the way to the bottom, which we can do by just using whatever the least significant set bit is that we find in the mask. And then we can shift it back up to its actual location. Since we're already doing that, we might as well just use a known mask because we can. It's free for us to do it. And it avoids us having to even bother doing anything with these guys. They can be reused. They don't have to stay in registers. They can just be reused, right? So it'd just be less efficient, frankly, to use these masks at that point. Can you ever talk about the code you made that shipped 2,000 plus times? Sure. So it's a animation, it's a runtime animation package, and it's basically like you know, you can actually see up here they've got a bunch of random marketing stuff, right? Like it's a runtime animation system and a thing that exports stuff out of Max and Maya and stuff like that. So basically, like, you know, I wrote like all this stuff for art pipelines. So it basically like pulls data out of Max and Maya and like condition it and then play it back at runtime and provide access to it and that sort of stuff, and, you know, do animation blending and that sort of stuff. So that's basically what it is. Bink is a video playback engine, and I worked on the second version of it. I was basically the second programmer on it for Jeff because he just had a lot of work to do on it. So I was sort of doing a bunch of the code gen stuff and just stuff that needed to be done on the project. So. What about stunt hamsters? Yeah, there is stunt hamsters. There's stunt hamsters, and there's also the owl flying game, but those are not like actual released games. Those were game jam games. Will we use a component system mapping smaller focus structs like collision and graphics entities to allow looping over more of each per frame? Yeah, but I would say let's wait till we get there. There's a bunch of stuff we have to talk about with entities, and that's like the least of our concerns. Any estimation for when GUIs will appear? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that exactly. We won't have any GUIs in this game. It's strictly going to be an action game. There's not going to be like menus and stuff. Momoiziko or Moiziko, so those rotate instructions that you're talking about, he was posting that you do have rotate instructions and he was posting like them. Unless I'm very much mistaken, those are only 16-bit rotates, so they don't help you. But I'll double check. Oops, typed it in wrong. There we go. But maybe not. We'll see. Do these actually work? Wait, is this a 64-bit rotate? When did that happen? Does this actually work? Has anyone actually tried this? I did not know that you could do a 64-bit rotate. Where is this documented? Rotates bits. Like, what is it supported on? Or does it not say? It's just like, you get to guess what it's supported on. Because, yes, we could totally use a rotate if we had a rotate. But I didn't know you could rotate more than 16. Because I know that they've got the old rotate instructions on x86. But in x64, I didn't know if they had ever actually put any of them in there. So that'd be kind of cool. Does this work? Or like I just don't want to find out this is only Itanium or something. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, why don't you give me any useful things here? So let's. Oh wait, but these aren't intrinsics, though. So these might not actually be instructions, right? So I don't know that this is actually useful, but we'll check it out. So let's find out. Let's find out. We'll see. If I want to call this, what was that one actually called there? Underscore rotl. Unsigned int value and int shift. So I guess what I have to do is red shift. So, and then the value is just whatever. Who cares what the value is? Let's say that it's the green mask for some reason. Okay. So, oops. So what I want to do here is I want to say, all right, I get uint32 back, which is my result. Let's see what happens there. Cannot convert argument 2 from bits. Oh, right. I got to do redshift dot index. Okay. So let's see what that actually ends up doing. And then we'll have to check. We might have to turn on the optimizer to actually get it to do what it would actually do for real. So this may not be a fair test, but I just want to see what it ends up doing here with that guy. Let's see. There. All right. So let's open up the disassembly and see what's going down. There we go. So does this actually work? Well, that's a full-on ROL instruction. Does that actually work? This is going to be pretty darn exciting if this works. Whoa. Yeah, I did not know that you had those in x64. I mean, I guess I hadn't had an occasion to go find out. But that's pretty awesome if that's actually true. Because yes, then if we have the rotate, then we can totally do it. Because basically all we need to do if we have the rotate is we can just make sure that we know whatever the difference is between these two. Yeah, and then we wouldn't have to do two shifts, right? We can do a single shift. So let's try that. So what we want to do here is if we have a rotate, then let's see. We have our red shift, and the red shift is where the red is currently. And we know where we want the red to be. And so what we could do is say, all right, we want to take where we want the red to be, which is 16 up, right? And we want to subtract from that whatever that index is. What is our bit scan result here? Let's see, handmade intrinsics.h. What is our bit scan result? So our bit scan result, find least significant set bit, comes back with that index there. Okay, and so what we'll do is we'll say, all right, whatever that index is, we will subtract that index from 16. And then if it's more than 16, it'll just basically be a rotate in the other direction. So it'll be a rotate right. Now I want to make sure this is signed, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it's signed like that. And we'll basically say that, okay, we can rotate left now, whatever that value actually is. So this is actually going to be our red shift is actually going to be something else. So this is like the red shift search, if you will. So this is the red shift, or I guess we'll call this red scan. So we'll do red scan, red scan, red scan, like so on. And then that way we can still assert that they actually were found. And then we can just do redshift equals this, like so, right? Like that. And that way we now have all of the values. So we have red, green, blue, and alpha. We will actually have the shifts where we want them to go, right? And then, if I'm not misunderstanding how this function is meant to work, then we could actually use those rotates. And that'd be pretty cool, because that's the only reason that we weren't using the masks before. So now we actually can use the masks, and we can say, all right, let's do our same calculation here, but instead of doing it this way, right, we'll do it using a rotation. So let's see. I need to do rotate left. And I guess I'm purely arbitrarily picking rotate left, but we'll do redshift. And I want to do C is the value. So I'm going to do C and red mask, like so on. So basically that's all I have to do. So yeah, I think that's it, right? I think that's really all we need to do. We do C and green mask, blue mask, alpha mask, and then we shift them by the different shifts. And then all we have to do is actually put those intrinsics in somewhere. So in here, we need to actually put in the rotate left, and that'll take a value and a amount, and it will return that rotl. There we go. And for good measure, we might as well do a rotate right. You know what I'm saying? All right. So will this actually do what we want? I have actually no idea. Because like I said, I didn't even know those were in x64. They are, which is pretty great. So let's go ahead and make sure that I'm actually doing any of this right. So red shift, green shift, blue shift, alpha shift. So let's see if I agree with what it computed for those first. Blue mask, alpha mask. So, and please hexadecimal me. There we go. So the red mask is there, it needs to be there. That is a -8 shift. So is that, and that one is a 24. So yeah, I agree with all of those. Those are exactly what I would expect them to be. And let's go see what it actually generated here. Inside rotl. Let's see, result and value. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about. Whoa! Thank you, Visual Studio. I don't know what you were talking about there, but that's fine. All right. So hey, awesome. So that answers two questions. That answers my question about whether you can rotate an x64. Turns out you can. And that answers Trireme Rufus's question about why we weren't using the mask. Well, we weren't using the mask because I didn't know that we could rotate. And so I didn't think I had that option. But we can rotate, so now we're all good. So that's totally great. And thank you, Mozico, I don't know how to pronounce that, but for pointing those out, because I think I even searched for them at one point and didn't find them. So that's pretty cool that those are there. All right, I think we could just say that's done. Let's just call it. There we go. Cool. All right. Okay. I think that's it for questions. Let's take a look. Okay, so Matt D says that rotate will work, but it's micro-coded, so don't use it when you need performance. So maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all. Who knows, though? Um, it depends on whether the micro-coded version is faster than the shift than doing two shifts, which it might be. I don't really know. Doesn't the rotate mess with XP compatible thing you were watching? No, not really, because the XP compatibility for x86 code, it should still work, but it would just be like a slower version or something like that, I would think, because it looks like the 32-bit. No, actually, the 32-bit version is available on x86. I'm pretty sure, so that should be fine. It was only x64 that I wasn't sure about. Yeah, I don't know. So it's a good question, though. Just how fast it is if it's microcoded. I wonder what the actual speeds are. And one interesting thing to look at would be like I wonder if the Agner fog tables talk about what the actual speed is roughly, like what you would expect it to be in general. And I don't really know. So. What I don't want to be on this yeah, so that's I want it to show me more I want to look down at more modern, one of the more modern processors. Well, I guess I'll just do it this way. That'll work. So, how bad does it get? Is basically the question. I don't want to know about the Nano 3000. I always have such trouble using these tables. I want them to be organized a little bit easier. Maybe just like a search or something that tells you like, okay, here's the I want them like by all the processors listed next to the instruction, which is easier said than done. Someone needs to make the Uber Agner fog tables or whatever. I wonder if that other site has any of the information like that on it. I don't think it does, but it's something we could check real quick. Oops. Yeah. No, that's not going to have it. That doesn't help. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to know across like a couple processors how bad it was, because it might be that rotate's still better than doing two shifts. You know, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know the timings of it. So it'd be interesting to see. Yeah, it did look fast to me. Pseudonym 73. It looked like it was going to be fast to me as well. So I think it's probably something you actually would want to do if you have to rotate. Like if you're going to actually do something that's a rotate operation, I suspect the microcoded rotate would be faster than you doing two shifts, because otherwise, why wouldn't it just microcode to two shifts? Right? But I don't know. Maybe not. I guess because it wouldn't maybe be able to quite figure that out. I don't know. Hard to say. But all right. Anyway, I think we have well and truly overstayed our welcome this evening. It is getting rather late. So let us call it a day. Tomorrow we can resume our collision detection stuff, since we're getting to the point where things are gonna be starting to be a little bit more pressing in terms of us figuring out exactly what our attack plan is going to be. Like I was saying today, we really at this point need to start sort of consolidating and figuring out how we want to do rendering stuff, because we're getting to the point where we want to start having debug visualizations and lots of stuff like that. So we're going to have to kind of go, all right, what are the things that we actually need to figure out here? Let's go figure them out so we can start to make the renderer proper and kind of leverage from there. And we've got our player movement thing kind of under control. We want to do the collision detection. And then the other big thing that I want to take a look at before we start to talk about the renderer, though, is scene compositing. And so I feel like that's really something that I still want to do before we start tackling the renderer or finalizing on sort of how we're going about approaching things in the design. And so, so I think for the rest of the week, I suspect that we will probably work on the character movement code, getting some animation in there and seeing how we want to do animation of the character, and what we want from the renderer in terms of that, because I think that'll be very important to know and how we'll want that to line up. And then the thing that I think we'll want to move on to after that is how to do scene composition. So let's start actually taking tile maps, building actual scenes out of them, and seeing what we want in terms of that scene composition stuff. And then that, I think, will probably put us into a pretty good place where we can sort of say, all right, now we can go build the renderer and the final like sort of world storage stuff and get that working to a good place. And then that'll kind of tie up all of our engine-y sort of stuff that we need to do. We want to do sound at some point too, but again, this game doesn't have a lot of demands in terms of sound, so those will probably be a lot simpler than the stuff that we're doing here because, we're just going to be doing basic stuff, music playback and sound effects. We don't have a whole lot of stuff that we need to sort of think about there, so that'll be a little bit easier than the graphics, to say the least. But that's basically where we're at, so we're feeling pretty good about it. Again, we're only just now, we're about 5 hours. We're not even off of Monday on our second week of coding, if this were mapped to the weekday. So we've made quite a bit of progress for how short of a time we've actually been programming for, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, I will be back here tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. to start working on the collision texture. 8:30, not 8 Pacific Standard Time, because John Blow is doing his next compiler presentation tomorrow, and I would like to watch it. So I may come on the stream at the normal time, but I will just have John on my desktop, and I'll be watching him because I want to see what he has to present. So if you want to join me for that, that's cool too, but I won't be actually starting Handmade Hero until 8:30. So that will be a slight difference tomorrow, but then we'll be back to 8 o'clock the following night. So I would love it if you would join me. I hope to see you here tomorrow. If you would like to pre-order the game and get access to the source code, you can, as always, do that at handmadehero.org. That is the site that has the handy-dandy pre-order button on it. And if you want to do that, you will be able to follow along with the source code because I upload it every night after we finish programming together. If you want to support the video series, we also have a Patreon that you can go to. And of course, for more educational resources, there's always the news and forum site, which is a great place to go. I highly recommend it. It's got the schedule for the week always posted on. It's got an episode guide so you can catch up on past videos. It's got coding resources where people have ported stuff to other platforms already, even though we haven't, they have. So if you're looking to get it running on Mac or Linux or something, that's a great place to go. And there's a code discussion board where you can go and ask programming questions. If you want to discuss the series in more detail, that's a great place to do it. So I highly recommend it for people trying to learn from the series. It's a great place to go. Definitely check it out. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. And it has been a pleasure coding with you, as always. I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 8:30. And until then, have a good one.